Tourists on safari are halted by a baby elephant. When they discover why she stopped them, hearts melt and eyes fill with tears. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning sun beat down on the open-top Jeep as Mark steered it through the African savanna. His passengers, a diverse group of tourists, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the tension among them almost as palpable as the humid air. Mark had led hundreds of safaris before, but something about this group felt different. On your right, you'll notice a herd of zebras, Mark announced, his voice carrying the practiced tone of an experienced guide. He adjusted his khaki hat, weathered from years under the African sun. They typically gather in family groups, which we call harems. Lisa, seated near the back of the Jeep, leaned forward with her notebook in hand. Her critical gaze swept over the landscape, taking in every detail with scientific precision. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her cargo pants had multiple pockets filled with research equipment. Unlike the other tourists who snapped photos frantically, she observed with measured attention, occasionally jotting down notes. The zebra's stripes serve multiple purposes, Mark continued, including confusing predators, and he was cut off by a sharp ringtone. Dave, dressed in an incongruously crisp business shirt, fumbled with his phone. "Sorry, I have to take this," he announced, not sounding sorry at all. "Johnson?" "Yeah, about those quarterly reports." His voice carried over the engine's rumble, drawing irritated glances from the other passengers. The Jeep continued its journey through the savannah, passing acacia trees and occasional groups of impalas. Mark pointed out various species, his commentary a steady stream of information that competed with Dave's business conversation. The other tourists, a retired couple from Canada, a young honeymoon pair, and a solo traveler from Australia, tried to focus on the wildlife, but Dave's voice kept pulling their attention back. Lisa's pencil moved across her notebook, sketching quick diagrams of animal behavior patterns. Her background in biology made her see beyond the surface-level tourism experience. She noticed hierarchies within the animal groups, territorial markers, and behavioral patterns that most tourists missed. The morning progressed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat became more intense, and the initial excitement of the safari began to wear thin. The group had seen various animals, but nothing extraordinary had happened yet. The retired couple whispered to each other about the lunch break, while the honeymooners seemed more interested in each other than the wildlife. Suddenly, Mark's hand shot up in a signal for silence. The Jeep slowed to a stop. Dave, still on his phone, continued talking until the Australian tourist reached over and firmly pressed the end call button on his phone. Before Dave could protest, everyone saw what had caused Mark to stop. Standing in the middle of the dirt track ahead was a baby elephant. Its small form blocked their path completely, and its behavior immediately caught everyone's attention. The calf wasn't simply crossing the road or playing. Something was wrong. Its trunk was raised, swaying anxiously, and its ears flapped in distress. The atmosphere in the Jeep changed instantly. The previous tension dissolved, replaced by collective concern. Lisa's notebook lowered slowly as she leaned forward, her scientific detachment giving way to genuine worry. Even Dave, momentarily forgetting his interrupted call, stared at the scene unfolding before them. Mark reached for the ignition, turning off the engine. The sudden silence amplified the baby elephant's distressed sounds. "Everyone," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that commanded attention, "I need you to turn off your phones. No pictures, no calls. This is a moment that deserves our full attention." One by one, phones were switched off and put away. The group sat in complete silence, watching the baby elephant. The savanna around them seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, something shifted among the passengers. Their previous roles, the busy businessman, the studious biologist, the bored tourists, melted away. They were simply humans, witnessing something profound in the heart of the African wilderness. None of them knew yet how this encounter would change their lives or the secrets that would soon emerge. For now, they sat in unified silence, watching the baby elephant that stood between them and their destination. unaware that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary chain of events. The baby elephant's call pierced the silence, a high-pitched trumpet that echoed across the savannah. The sound carried such desperation that several tourists instinctively gripped their seats. The Canadian woman reached for her husband's hand, while the honeymooners pressed closer together. Lisa's training kicked in as she observed the calf's behavior. Its movements showed clear signs of distress. The constant shifting of weight, the raised trunk testing the air, the way it kept looking toward the dense patch of acacia trees to their left. This wasn't normal elephant behavior, especially for a calf this young to be alone. Shouldn't its mother be nearby? The Australian tourist whispered, voicing everyone's concern. Mark held up his hand for silence, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Years of experience had taught him to read situations like this carefully. Adult elephants were never far from their young, and a distressed calf could mean a protective mother wasn't far behind, a potentially dangerous situation for everyone in the Jeep. The baby elephant let out another call, more urgent this time. The sound seemed to physically affect Lisa. She leaned forward, her notebook forgotten in her lap. Her eyes never left the calf as she whispered to herself, documenting its behavior. Repeated distress calls, searching behavior, approximately 8 months old. Dave, still recovering from his interrupted phone call, cleared his throat. Well, I guess this is what we paid for, right? A real wildlife show. He forced a laugh, trying to break the tension. Nobody responded. The honeymoon couple shot him annoyed looks, and the Canadian couple pointedly ignored him. But Dave's forced joviality couldn't mask his own growing unease. He found himself watching Lisa instead of the elephant, noting how completely absorbed she was in the unfolding drama. Her intensity made him conscious of his own superficial response. Here was someone who actually understood what they were witnessing, while he'd spent the morning on his phone discussing profit margins. The calf took a few steps toward the acacia thicket, then back to the road, as if torn between staying and going. Its anxiety was becoming more pronounced. Lisa's breath caught as she noticed something about its movement pattern. "Mark," she said quietly, "I think it's trying to tell us something." Before Mark could respond, the baby elephant made a decision. It turned and moved purposefully toward the thicket, looking back at the Jeep as if expecting them to follow. The vegetation rustled as the calf pushed through, and then they all heard it, a low, pained rumble coming from within the trees. The sound galvanized everyone in the Jeep. Mark quickly turned off the engine, his experienced eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. The tourists leaned forward as one, straining to see through the foliage. The baby elephant had disappeared into the thicket, but they could still hear it moving through the vegetation. Then came the moment that would change everything. The baby elephant emerged briefly from the thicket, trumpeting more urgently now. As the vegetation parted, they caught a glimpse of what lay beyond, and collective gasps filled the Jeep. There, partially hidden by the acacias, was the massive form of an adult elephant, clearly the calf's mother. She lay on her side, one leg caught in what appeared to be a metal snare. The revelation hit the group like a physical force. The Canadian woman covered her mouth in horror. The honeymooners gripped each other tighter. The Australian tourist muttered a curse under his breath. But it was Lisa's reaction that drew Dave's attention. Her face had hardened with determination, and he could see her mind already working on solutions. The situation had suddenly become far more serious than a simple wildlife encounter. They were now witnesses to a crisis, one that would force each of them to confront their own values and choices. The mother elephant's predicament would become a catalyst, though none of them yet realized just how much this moment would transform their lives. Dave felt something shift inside him as he watched the scene unfold. His phone, still silent in his pocket, seemed to weigh differently now. The urgent emails and meetings that had consumed his attention minutes ago suddenly felt trivial compared to the drama playing out before them. He glanced at Lisa again, seeing her in a new light as she focused intently on the trapped elephant, and felt the first stirrings of something that would soon complicate everything. The baby elephant continued its plaintive calls, moving between its mother and the Jeep, as if begging for help. The group sat frozen, watching this display of devotion and desperation. unaware that their response to this crisis would soon unveil secrets that would change them all forever. The silence in the Jeep shattered as Lisa suddenly stood up, her movements decisive and purposeful. "We have to help them," she declared, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. Years of studying animal behavior had taught her that elephants, like humans, form deep emotional bonds. The calf's desperate attempts to help its mother weren't just instinct. They were expressions of genuine distress and love. During my research on elephant social structures, Lisa explained, keeping her voice steady despite her rising emotion, "I documented numerous cases of elephants helping not just their own family members, but other species as well. They're capable of empathy and complex problem-solving." The other tourists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The honeymoon couple exchanged worried glances, while the Canadian couple whispered hurried concerns about safety. The Australian tourist leaned forward, clearly interested but uncertain. Dave remained seated, his internal struggle visible on his face. The situation demanded action, something more meaningful than the business decisions he made daily. His fingers reflexively moved toward his phone, seeking the comfort of familiar corporate problems, but he stopped himself. The sight of the trapped mother and her desperate calf stirred something in him. A memory, perhaps, or a recognition of something he'd lost in his pursuit of success. "It wouldn't be safe," he finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We should call the proper authorities." But even as he spoke, he knew the hollow ring of his words reflected the emptiness he'd been feeling in his own life. The mother elephant let out another low, pained sound, and Dave's resistance began to crumble. Mark had been quietly assessing the situation, weighing his responsibilities as a guide against his moral obligations. He'd seen countless examples of animals in distress during his years in the savannah, but something about this situation felt different. The determination in Lisa's eyes, the unusual tension in Dave's posture, the way the group seemed to be holding its collective breath. It all pointed to a moment of significance beyond a simple rescue. "You're right," Mark finally announced, surprising everyone. "We need to help, but we need to be smart about this." He reached under his seat and pulled out a first aid kit and some tools. "I've dealt with snares before, but never with an elephant this size. We'll need to work together." The announcement galvanized the group. The Canadian couple, despite their initial hesitation, began gathering water bottles and supplies. The honeymooners moved to help Mark with the equipment. The Australian tourist positioned himself as a lookout, scanning the horizon for any approaching dangers. Lisa quickly took charge of planning the rescue, her academic knowledge finding practical application. "Elephants are highly intelligent and can sense our intentions," she explained. "We need to approach calmly and make sure both mother and baby understand we're trying to help." Dave watched all this with growing admiration. The corporate world he inhabited suddenly seemed artificial compared to this raw, real moment. He found himself moving to help, drawn into action not by obligation, but by genuine desire to be part of something meaningful. Mark distributed gloves and basic tools, giving clear instructions about safety procedures. "Remember, we're dealing with wild animals. No matter how desperate the situation, we must remain cautious." His voice carried the weight of experience, but also a hint of something more personal, though he wasn't ready to share that yet. The baby elephant watched their preparations with what seemed like understanding, its trunk raised in their direction, testing their scent. The mother remained still, conserving her energy, her eyes following their movements. The sun beat down mercilessly as the group prepared for their rescue attempt, unaware that this shared mission would soon unearth secrets that would bind them together in unexpected ways. Lisa caught Dave's eye as they gathered their supplies, and something passed between them. A recognition of the moment's importance, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of how far they'd come from their initial roles as distant observer and distracted businessman. Neither could have guessed how this shared experience would complicate their lives in the hours to come. The group moved forward as one, each step taking them further from their comfortable roles as tourists and closer to something more profound. The baby elephant's calls had quieted, as if sensing help was coming. The mother's eyes watched them approach, her massive form still except for her gentle breathing. The acacia trees cast dappled shadows across the scene, nature itself seeming to hold its breath as this unusual alliance of humans moved to assist one of its own. What none of them realized, as they approached the trapped elephant, was that this rescue attempt would become the catalyst for revelations that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. The true story was just beginning to unfold beneath the African sun. As the group approached the trapped elephant, the gravity of the situation seemed to dissolve the barriers between them. The Canadian husband, George, was the first to break the tense silence. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this reminds me of when our daughter was trapped under a fallen tree during a camping trip. The way everyone came together to help. You never forget moments like that." His wife, Sarah, squeezed his hand, adding, "It's amazing how crisis brings out our true nature." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than she intended, causing Dave to shift uncomfortably. The mother elephant's eyes followed their movement, intelligent and aware. Despite her obvious pain, she remained remarkably calm, as if understanding their intentions. The baby elephant had positioned itself between them and its mother, its behavior a complex mixture of protection and plea for help. "In my research," Lisa explained as they carefully moved closer, "I've documented countless instances of elephants dispo, eyeing emotional intelligence that rivals humans. They mourn their dead, protect their young, and remember both kindness and cruelty." She paused, then added more quietly, "They understand family better than most humans do." The Australian tourist, who had introduced himself as Jake, nodded thoughtfully. "Lost my own mum last year," he shared unexpectedly. "Traveled here because she always wanted to see Africa. Funny how life works. Here I am, watching another mother fighting to stay with her child." The honeymoon couple, Amy and Tom, worked together to carry supplies. "We hope to start our own family soon," Amy confided, her eyes fixed on the baby elephant. Watching this little one try so hard to help its mother, it makes you think about what really matters, doesn't it? Mark listened to these confessions while assessing the trap, his experienced hands moving carefully around the metal snare. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone stop and listen. "I've spent 20 years in this savanna," he began, "watching families of all species fight for survival. But it wasn't until I lost my own mother that I truly understood what we witness out here." The group fell silent, watching as Mark's hands stilled on the trap. The personal revelation seemed to change the air around them. The mother elephant rumbled softly, as if acknowledging his pain. "She was a conservationist," Mark continued, his focus still on the trap. "Spent her whole life fighting to protect these animals. When she died, I promised I'd continue her work. Every time I see something like this," he gestured to the snare, "I remember why she fought so hard." Dave, who had been unusually quiet, found himself moving closer to the trap. His expensive shirt was now stained with dust and sweat, his corporate persona stripped away by the urgency of the moment. "I haven't spoken to my mother in 5 years," he admitted. The words seemingly surprised even him. Business disagreements, corporate takeovers, it all seemed so important at the time. Lisa looked at him with new understanding, seeing past the superficial businessman she'd initially dismissed. The baby elephant trumpeted softly, drawing closer to its mother, its trunk reaching out to touch her face in a gesture so tender it brought tears to several eyes. "The bond between mother and child," Lisa observed, her scientific tone softening. "It's one of the most fundamental connections in nature. It transcends species, transcends our human constructs of importance and success." She met Dave's eyes as she spoke, and something unspoken passed between them. The mother elephant's breathing had become more labored, adding urgency to their task. The sun beat down mercilessly as they worked, but no one complained. Their shared purpose had transformed them from a random group of tourists into something more, witnesses to and participants in a drama that reflected their own lives and choices. They worked methodically, following Mark's instructions, each person's role becoming clear without need for discussion. The baby elephant watched their every move, occasionally reaching out with its trunk to touch its mother reassuringly. The scene was both heartbreaking and inspiring, a testament to the bonds that hold families together, regardless of species. None of them realized yet how this shared experience would lead to revelations that would shake their understanding of themselves and each other. The secrets that would soon emerge were still hidden, like the snare beneath the African soil, waiting to be exposed by the events set in motion by this rescue attempt. The air grew thicker with unspoken emotions and untold stories as they worked to free the trapped elephant. Each person felt the weight of their own family histories, their choices, their regrets, and their hopes, all reflected in the desperate struggle before them. The truth that would soon emerge would change everything, but for now, they were united in their purpose, their individual stories merging into a singular mission of salvation. A sharp metallic screech cut through the air as they worked on the trap, causing everyone to freeze. The sound echoed across the savannah, setting nearby birds to flight. The mother elephant shifted nervously, and her baby immediately pressed closer to her side. "Easy, easy," Mark cautioned, his hands steady on the snare despite the tension. The metal had begun to give way, but the sound had unnerved everyone. The peaceful bubble of shared confidences burst, replaced by the stark reality of their situation. Lisa stepped forward, her mind racing through her knowledge of elephant behavior and rescue operations. "We need to approach this differently," she announced, her academic training finding practical application. "The metal's too corroded to simply pry apart. We need to distribute the pressure evenly to avoid any sudden movements that might startle her." She began organizing the group with surprising authority. "Dave, take this end of the rope. Sarah and George, I need you on the other side. Tom and Amy, be ready with the water. She'll need it once we get her free. Jake, keep watch for other wildlife. This sound might attract attention we don't want." The sudden shift in Lisa's demeanor caught Dave's attention. Gone was the quiet research student. In her place stood a confident leader. He found himself responding to her directions without question, moving into position with the rope. Their hands brushed as she showed him where to grip, and both pretended not to notice the momentary connection. "On my count," Lisa called out, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Remember, smooth and constant force. The moment you feel any sudden give, stop immediately. Ready?" The group tensed, ropes in hand. The mother elephant seemed to sense the importance of the moment, remaining remarkably still. Her baby stood nearby, trunk raised, watching with what looked like hope in its expressive eyes. "1, 2, 3, pull!" They worked in unison, their combined strength focusing on the snare. Sweat dripped down their faces as they maintained steady pressure. The metal groaned in protest, but Lisa's method was working. The trap was gradually loosening its grip. The mother elephant remained calm, though her breathing had quickened. Her baby moved restlessly between her and the group, as if offering encouragement to both. Mark kept his hands on the metal, ready to guide it away the moment it released. Suddenly, the trap gave way with an unexpected crack. The group stumbled backward, catching themselves before they fell. The mother elephant let out a low rumble, shifting her weight. Everyone held their breath, watching as she slowly moved her leg. "It's working!" Lisa exclaimed, her professional demeanor cracking with excitement. "Keep going, just a little more." Dave found himself next to her as they repositioned for a final effort. The businessman who had been so concerned with phone calls that morning was gone, replaced by someone who understood the weight of this moment. He caught Lisa's eye, and they shared a brief smile of shared purpose. The final push took everything they had. When the trap finally fell away, the sound of it hitting the ground was almost anticlimactic compared to the emotional weight of the moment. The mother elephant carefully tested her injured leg, while her baby pressed close, trunk wrapping around her in what could only be described as an embrace. Mark quickly moved in to check the wound, his experienced eyes assessing the damage. "It's not too deep," he reported, relief evident in his voice. "These traps are designed to hold, not kill. She'll heal, especially with a devoted nurse like this little one." The group stood back, watching the reunion between mother and baby. The elephant's injury had brought them together, forcing them to work as one, but something else had happened in those eyes. In some moments, barriers had broken down, Pretenses had fallen away, and connections had formed that would soon lead to unexpected revelations. As they gathered their equipment, Lisa caught sight of Dave staring at his phone, still turned off from earlier. The look on his face suggested he was wrestling with something more than missed business calls. The mother elephant's trumpeting call, this time one of joy rather than distress, drew their attention back to the present moment. None of them could have predicted how this successful rescue would catalyze the events to come. The secrets that lurked beneath their carefully constructed facades were about to emerge, much like the hidden trap they'd just exposed and neutralized. But for now, they simply stood together, united in the aftermath of their shared triumph, watching as mother and baby disappeared into the African bush, their silhouettes merging with the golden afternoon light. As the elephants disappeared into the bush, their forms gradually fading into the golden landscape, a heavy silence fell over the group. The adrenaline of the rescue began to ebb, leaving space for deeper reflections. Dave stood slightly apart from the others, his usual confident posture replaced by something more uncertain. He watched the retreating elephants, but his mind was elsewhere. The sight of the baby elephant's unwavering dedication to its mother had struck something deep within him. In his pocket, his phone felt like a lead weight, hundreds of unread emails and missed calls representing a life that suddenly seemed hollow. "I don't even remember the last time I called my mother," he muttered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud until Lisa turned to look at him. The understanding in her eyes made him uncomfortable. He was used to being judged for his success, his wealth, his business acumen, but this was different. She saw through all of that to something he'd been avoiding for years. Meanwhile, Lisa was experiencing her own epiphany. The academic detachment she'd cultivated throughout her biology studies had crumbled in the face of real-world crisis. Theory and observation were one thing. Action was another. "I can't go back to just studying them," she announced suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. Mark nodded, understanding immediately. "You're thinking of staying?" "Not just staying," Lisa replied, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I want to start a conservation project. These traps, they're everywhere, aren't they? And it's not just elephants that need help." Her eyes blazed with purpose. "I've spent years documenting behavior patterns, but what's the point of all that knowledge if we don't use it to protect them?" The Canadian couple exchanged glances, clearly moved by her passion. The honeymoon couple, Tom and Amy, stepped closer, interested. Jake, the Australian tourist, was already pulling out a notebook, jotting down ideas. "It won't be easy," Mark cautioned, but his tone was encouraging. "Starting a conservation project here takes more than just good intentions. You'll need funding, local support, government permissions." He trailed off, noting how Lisa's determination only seemed to grow with each obstacle he listed. Dave listened to this exchange with growing unease. His corporate instincts recognized a viable project in Lisa's passion, the kind of thing his company might fund for good PR. But something felt wrong about reducing this moment to a business opportunity. The mother elephant's struggle, her baby's devotion, Lisa's raw determination. It all pointed to something more meaningful than corporate social responsibility. Mark gathered the group closer, speaking with the weight of experience. "What we witnessed today, it's not just about saving one elephant family. It's about choosing what kind of people we want to be. Do we observe, document, and move on? Or do we take action, make changes, fight for what matters?" His words resonated differently with each person. The honeymooners held hands tighter, perhaps seeing their future differently. The Canadian couple whispered about their retirement plans. Jake scribbled more intensely in his notebook. But it was Dave who seemed most affected. The successful businessman, who had started the day irritated by wildlife interrupting his calls, now stood silent, wrestling with questions he'd avoided for years. His company's latest acquisition, the one he'd been so focused on this morning, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the raw authenticity of what he'd just witnessed. Lisa approached him cautiously, sensing his internal struggle. "Sometimes the biggest impact we can make isn't where we expected to find it," she said quietly, echoing thoughts he hadn't yet formed into words. Mark watched this interaction with knowing eyes, having seen many people transformed by their experiences in the African bush. But something about this group felt different. The way they had come together, the skills they each brought, the timing of it all. It seemed almost predetermined. What none of them realized yet was how their individual responses to this moment would soon collide with hidden truths, creating a chain reaction that would force them to confront not just their choices, but their very identities. The mother elephant's rescue was complete, but their own journey of discovery was just beginning. As they prepared to return to the jeep, the sound of the elephant's distant trumpeting reached them, a reminder of the real-world impact of their actions. Each person carried something different away from the experience. Lisa, a new purpose. The other tourists, fresh perspectives. Mark, renewed faith in humanity's capacity for good. And Dave. Dave carried questions that would soon lead him to a revelation that would shake the entire group to its core. The walk back to the jeep felt longer than it should have. Dave lagged behind the group, his eyes fixed on Lisa's determined stride ahead. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the savannah, mirroring the lengthening shadows in his own thoughts. His hand kept reaching for his phone, a habitual gesture now laden with new meaning. Each time his fingers brushed against it, he remembered the mother elephant's struggle, her baby's devotion, and Lisa's passionate declaration about conservation. The decision he faced seemed simultaneously simple and impossibly complex. "Quite a day, mate," Jake commented, falling in a step beside him. "Makes you think about what really matters, doesn't it?" Dave nodded absently, his mind racing through possibilities. He could easily write a check, make a corporate donation, add wildlife conservation to his company's CSR portfolio. It would be the expected response from someone in his position. Clean, simple business as usual. But the hollow feeling in his chest suggested that wouldn't be enough this time. Up ahead, Lisa was deep in conversation with Mark, her hands moving animatedly as she outlined her vision for the conservation project. "We could start with a survey of the affected areas, document the trap locations, work with local communities." The passion in her voice made Dave's corporate solutions feel even more inadequate. He watched her gesture toward the horizon, describing her plans with the same intensity she'd shown during the rescue. Something about her unwavering commitment to what she believed and made his own life choices seem shallow in comparison. As they reached the jeep, everyone paused to look back at where they'd come from. The mother and baby elephant were long out of sight, but their impact lingered in the charged atmosphere among the group. The Canadian couple whispered about changing their retirement plans to include volunteer work. Tom and Amy discussed postponing their honeymoon cruise to donate to conservation efforts instead. Mark started the engine, the familiar rumble breaking the contemplative mood. As everyone climbed in, Dave's phone suddenly burst to life, catching up with all the missed notifications. The screen lit up with urgent messages, missed calls, and one particular email that made his blood run cold. "Final approval needed for Savannah Resort Development, urgent," the words blurred before his eyes. His company's latest project, the one he'd been so excited about this morning, now felt like a lead weight in his stomach. The proposed luxury resort would be built right here, in this exact area. The same landscape where they just rescued the elephant family. The same wilderness Lisa wanted to protect. He glanced at her, now sitting across from him in the jeep, still energetically discussing conservation plans with the others. The magnitude of his secret pressed against his chest like a physical force. His company wasn't just planning to build here. They were already in the final stages of approval. The very habitat they just helped protect was slated for destruction. The jeep bounced along the dirt track, heading back to camp. Each jolt seemed to emphasize the rhythm of thoughts pounding in Dave's head. He could stop it. He had the power to halt the development. But it would mean sacrificing everything he'd worked for, betraying his board's trust, possibly ending his career. Lisa caught his eye, offering a smile that twisted the knife of guilt deeper. "You've been quiet," she observed. "Still processing everything?" "Just thinking about changes," he managed to reply, the words feeling inadequate against the weight of his unspoken truth. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. As they approached the camp, Dave could see a small group of people gathered near the main building. Even from a distance, something about their presence seemed urgent, important. "That's strange," Mark muttered, squinting at the gathering. Those look like local conservation officials. Lisa straightened in her seat, excited by the possibility of immediate action on her plans. But Dave recognized one of the figures, his company's local representative. The moment of truth was approaching faster than he'd anticipated, threatening to shatter the connections that had formed during their shared adventure. The Jeep rolled to a stop, and the day's events seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next revelation. None of them, except Dave, knew that the Real Challenge was just beginning. The truth he carried would soon force everyone to question not just their afternoon's achievement, but their understanding of each other and their own moral boundaries. The conservation officials approached as the group climbed out of the Jeep. Their expressions were grave, setting an immediate tone of urgency. Leading them was Sarah Mutua, a local environmental protection officer, her official badge glinting in the setting sun. "Mr. Thompson," she addressed Mark directly, "we need to discuss an urgent matter. A major development project has just received fast-track approval for this area." She spread out a map on the hood of the Jeep, pointing to familiar territories. The entire region, including the elephant migration routes, will be affected. Lisa stepped forward, her earlier enthusiasm hardening into determination. "What kind of development?" she demanded, though Dave already knew the answer, his secret becoming heavier with each passing moment. "A luxury resort complex," Sarah explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Complete with golf courses, artificial lakes, and a private airstrip. They're calling it the Savannah Experience." Her finger traced the proposed boundaries on the map, boundaries that encompassed the very spot where they'd just rescued the elephant family. The group's reactions were immediate and visceral. The Canadian couple gasped in dismay. Amy gripped Tom's hand, their honeymoon joy replaced by concern. Jake muttered something under his breath, already pulling out his foe. "Any to contact environmental journalist friends." Lisa's response was the most dynamic. "We can't let this happen," she declared, her academic reserve completely gone. "We just witnessed firsthand the importance of this habitat. These elephants are already dealing with poachers' traps. They can't lose their home too." She began outlining a resistance plan, her biology background lending authority to her words. "We need to document the wildlife populations, gather evidence of the ecological impact, mobilize public opinion." Her eyes blazed with purpose as she turned to the others. "Who's with me?" The response was unanimous almost. Dave stood slightly apart, his corporate mask cracking under the strain of his knowledge. The development plans in his email contained details that would horrify everyone present. The true scale of the project, the environmental corners cut, the local officials paid to look the other way. Sarah nodded approvingly at Lisa's suggestions. "We need to act fast." The company behind this, Global Leisure Developments, they're known for moving quickly once approval is granted. They've already begun preliminary surveys. Dave flinched at the mention of his company's name, but no one noticed. They were too busy gathering around Lisa as she organized them into action teams. The honeymooners volunteered to start a social media campaign. The Canadian couple offered to contact environmental organizations back home. Jake's journalism connections could provide media coverage. Mark stepped forward, his usual guide's composure charged with emotion. "I have 20 years of documentation about this area's wildlife. Photos, migration patterns, population data. Everything they need to see what they're destroying." Lisa was already creating a makeshift command center, spreading materials across a camp table. "We need to make this public," she insisted. "Once people see what's at stake." She paused, turning to Dave. "Your business experience could be invaluable. You understand corporate thinking. How can we best approach this?" The irony of her request hit Dave like a physical blow. Here was his moment of choice, crystallized in her trusting look. The others waited for his response, their faces showing nothing but confidence in their new ally. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her expression darkening. "They're moving faster than we thought. Corporate representatives are flying in tomorrow to begin the final site survey." The group's energy intensified, their shared purpose gaining urgency. They began organizing shifts, planning strategies, pooling resources. Their afternoon's experience had forged them into a team, united by their determination to protect what they'd helped save. Only Dave knew that tomorrow's corporate representatives would be looking for him, expecting their CEO to sign off on the project's next phase. His carefully constructed world of business success and moral compromise was about to collide with this newfound community of purpose and authenticity. The African sun set behind them, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples as the group threw themselves into their resistance planning. The truth was coming, as inevitable as the approaching night, and when it broke, it would test not just their newly formed bonds, but their understanding of redemption itself. The camp buzzed with activity as night fell. The group had commandeered the main lodge, transforming it into an impromptu campaign headquarters. Maps covered every surface. Laptops glowed with draft press releases, and phones buzzed constantly with incoming support from contacted organizations. Lisa stood at the center of it all, her scientific precision now turned to activism. She'd organized their efforts with remarkable efficiency. Jake coordinating with journalist contacts, the Canadian couple reaching out to international conservation groups, and the honeymooners managing social media responses that were already beginning to flood in. "We've got confirmation from 3 major environmental organizations," George announced, looking up from his phone. "They're sending representatives first thing tomorrow. And my editor's running with the story," Jake added. "It'll hit the morning news cycle in Australia, then spread globally." Dave watched from the periphery, each development increasing his internal turmoil. His phone continued to vibrate with messages from board members and executives, all expecting him to handle the local resistance they were already detecting. The irony of being on both sides of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. Mark approached the group with a stack of photographs. "These are from the last decade," he explained, spreading them across the table. "They show the elephant herd's migration patterns, their family structures, their interactions with the landscape." He paused at one photo, a mother elephant with her calf, eerily similar to the pair they'd helped today. "This is their home, has been for generations." The image struck a chord with everyone. Sarah Mutua, the environmental officer, leaned in to study it. "This is exactly what we need, evidence of established wildlife patterns." The development company claims this area has minimal ecological importance. Dave felt physically ill at her words, knowing he had signed off on those very claims. The constructed narrative of minimal impact had seemed reasonable in boardroom presentations. Now faced with actual evidence and real people fighting to protect this land, the corporate rhetoric felt like ash in his mouth. Lisa noticed his discomfort. "Dave, are you all right? You've been quiet." The concern in her voice nearly broke him. Throughout the afternoon, he'd watched her transform from a reserved academic into a passionate leader. Her integrity, her immediate commitment to action, her ability to unite people around a cause, it all highlighted the hollow nature of his own achieved success. He started, then faltered. The others turned to look at him, their faces showing nothing but trust and inclusion. They had no idea they were planning their resistance campaign alongside the very person they were fighting against. The mounting tension was interrupted by Amy, who had been monitoring social media. "Look at this," she called out, turning her laptop around. "People are already sharing stories about their safari experiences here. The hashtag Save the Savannah is trending." The group clustered around her screen, energized by the growing support. Tom pointed out comments from previous visitors, each one sharing memories of wildlife encounters in the area. The Canadian couple began recording their own story about the day's elephant rescue, planning to post it as part of the campaign. Sarah's phone rang, more local conservation groups pledging support. Mark unrolled another map, identifying crucial wildlife corridors that would be destroyed by the development. The momentum was building, a grassroots movement taking shape around their shared experience and purpose. Through it all, Dave stood in their midst, a silent carrier of truth that would soon shatter this unity. He watched Lisa coordinating efforts, her face animated with purpose. He observed Mark sharing his decades of knowledge, the honeymooners channeling their romantic optimism into activism, Jake crafting the narrative that would reach millions. The weight of his secret pressed against him like a physical force. Each person in the room had shared something personal during their ordeal with the elephants. Their hopes, their regrets, their connections to family and purpose. Now, as they work together to save this land, those shared vulnerabilities had created bonds that his revelation would soon test to their limits. Night deepened outside the lodge windows, and with it, Dave's certainty that he could no longer maintain his facade. Tomorrow would be our ING corporate representatives, official documents, and unavoidable revelations. The truth would emerge, one way or another. The only choice left to him was how, and whether anything of value could be salvaged from its impact. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the savannah when Dave's phone lit up with the call he'd been dreading. The display showed board chairman, and the others in the room noticed his sudden tension. Lisa, who had been up all night coordinating their resistance efforts, looked at him with concern. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle despite her exhaustion. Before Dave could respond, the lodge's door burst open. A group of suited executives strode in, led by a familiar face, his chief operating officer, Richard Wells. The contrast between their crisp corporate attire and the passionate, disheveled group of activists couldn't have been starker. "Dave!" Richard called out, then stopped abruptly, taking in the scene. His eyes swept over the maps, the protest plans, the evidence of their campaign, finally landing back on Dave with growing confusion. "What's going on here? We've been trying to reach you all night." The room fell silent. Lisa looked between Dave and Richard, her quick mind putting the pieces together. The others froze in their activities, sensing the approaching revelation. "You know each other?" Mark asked slowly, though the answer was becoming clear on everyone's faces. Dave stood, his corporate mask finally crumbling completely. "I'm the CEO of Global Leisure Developments," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and betrayal. Lisa took a step back, her face displaying a mix of emotions: hurt, anger, disbelief. The trust they'd built, the connection they'd formed, seemed to dissolve in an instant. "All this time," she said, her voice trembling, "while we were saving that elephant family, planning this resistance, you knew?" The honeymooners exchanged glances of dismay. The Canadian couple's faces hardened with disappointment. Jake reached for his phone, presumably to contact his editor with this unexpected development. Mark simply stood there, his decades of experience giving him a deeper understanding of human nature's complexities. Richard stepped forward, all business. "Dave, the board is waiting for your signature on the final approvals. We need to move forward before this situation gets out of hand." He gestured dismissively at their campaign materials. Dave looked around the room, seeing the impact of his deception on each face. But instead of feeling trapped, he felt something unexpected: liberation. The weight of his secret was gone, replaced by the clarity of choice. "No," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I won't sign." Richard's professional demeanor cracked. "What?" "Dave, think about what you're saying. This project represents millions in investment. Your entire career is built on decisions I can no longer defend," Dave interrupted. He turned to the group, to Lisa. "Yesterday, I watched a baby elephant risk everything to save its mother. I saw people from different backgrounds unite for something bigger than themselves. I realized that success means nothing if it costs us our humanity." He pulled out his phone, opened his email, and began typing. "I'm not just refusing to sign," he announced, his fingers moving decisively across the screen. "As CEO and major shareholder, I'm canceling the project entirely." The room erupted in chaos. Richard's face turned red as he sputtered about board obligations and shareholder lawsuits. The others watched in stunned silence as Dave continued typing, then hit send with finality. "I'm also pledging half of my personal shares to establish a conservation trust for this land," he added, looking directly at Lisa. "If you're willing, I'd like you to head the research and protection programs." Lisa's express sound shifted from hurt to cautious hope. "Why should we trust you now?" "Because sometimes," Dave replied, "we need to lose our way to find our true path." Yesterday's elephant rescue wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about saving ourselves from who we've become. The morning sun now filled the room, illuminating the maps and plans scattered across every surface. Outside, they could hear the distant trumpeting of elephants, perhaps the same family they'd helped, now safe in their preserved homeland. Mark stepped forward, placing a hand on Dave's shoulder. In 20 years of guiding safaris, he said, I've learned that the most important journeys are the ones that transform us. Sometimes it takes a baby elephant to teach us about loyalty, and sometimes it takes losing everything to help us find what truly matters. The group looked at each other, their shared experience of the previous day taking on new meaning. The betrayal was real, but so was the redemption they'd witnessed. As the African sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the savannah, they began to understand that their story wasn't just about saving elephants or stopping a development. It was about the complicated path to finding one's true nature and the unexpected ways that truth can set us all free.